cumbersome equipment and disturbing the ground. You can't. Only a few people handled the grass specimens: the lab, the intelligence officer in Florida, and I. The lab wouldn't do it as a joke, then write an official report, and I didn't do it. This leaves the intelligence officer. I'm positive that he wouldn't do it. There may be a single answer everyone is overlooking, but as of now, the charred grass roots from Florida are still a mystery. Writing an official report on this incident was difficult. On one side of the ledger was a huge mass of circumstantial evidence very heavily weighted against the Scoutmaster's story being true. On our second trip to Florida, Lieutenant Olson and I heard story after story about the man's aptitude for dreaming up tall tales. One man told us, "If he told me the sun was shining, I'd look up to make sure." There were parts of his story and those of the Boy Scouts that didn't quite mesh. None of us ever believed the Boy Scouts were in on the hoax. They were undoubtedly so impressed by the story that they imagined a few things they didn't actually see. The Scoutmaster's burns weren't proof of anything. The flight surgeon had duplicated these by burning his own arm with a cigarette lighter. But we didn't make step one in proving the incident to be a hoax. We thought up dozens of ways that the man could have set up the hoax, but couldn't prove one. In the Scoutmaster's favor were the two pieces of physical evidence we couldn't explain: the holes burned in the cap and the charred grass roots. The deputy sheriff who had first told me about the Scoutmaster's Marine and prison record had also said, "Maybe this is the one time in his life he's telling the truth, but I doubt it." So did we. We wrote off the incident as a hoax. The best hoax in UFO history. Many people have asked why we didn't give the Scoutmaster a lie detector test. We seriously considered it and consulted some experts in this field. They advised against it. In some definite types of cases, the lie detector will not give valid results. This, they thought, was one of those cases. Had we done it, and had he passed on the faulty results, the publicity would have been a headache. There is one way to explain the charred grass roots, the burned cap, and a few other aspects of the incident. It's believed that it is the answer, yet it is interesting. Since the blades of the grass were not damaged and the ground had not been disturbed, this one way is the only way. Nobody has thought of any other way. The soil could have been heated. It could have been done by induction heating. To quote from a section entitled Induction Heating from an electrical engineering textbook, "A rod of solid metal or any electrical conductor, when subjected to an alternating magnetic field, has electromotive forces set up in it. These electromotive forces cause what are known as eddy currents. A rise in temperature results from eddy currents. Induction heating is a common method of melting metals in a foundry. Replace the rod of solid metal mentioned above with damp sand, an electrical conductor, and assume that a something that was generating a powerful alternating magnetic field was hovering over the ground, and you can explain how the grass roots were charred. To get an alternating magnetic field, some type of electrical equipment was needed. Electricity, electrical sparks, the holes burned in the cap by electric sparks. UFO propulsion comes into the picture when one remembers Dr. Einstein's unified field theory concerning the relationship between electromagnetism and gravitation. If this alternating magnetic field can heat metal, why didn't everything the Scoutmaster had that was metal get hot enough to burn him? He had a flashlight, machete, coins in his pocket, etc. The answer: he wasn't under the UFO for more than a few seconds. He said that when he stopped to really look at it, he had backed away from under it. He did feel some heat, possibly radiating from the ground. To further pursue this line of speculation, the Scoutmaster repeatedly mentioned the unusual odor near the UFO. He described it as being sharp or pungent. Ozone gas is sharp or pungent. To quote from a chemistry book, ozone is prepared by passing air between two plates which are charged at a high electrical potential. Electrical equipment again. Breathing too high a concentration of ozone gas will also cause you to lose consciousness. I used to try out this induction heating theory on people to get their reaction. I tried it out one day on a scientist from RAND. He practically leaped at the idea. I laughed when I explained that I thought this theory just happened to tie together the unanswered aspects of the incident in Florida and was not the answer. He was slightly perturbed. "What do you want?" he said. "Does a UFO have to come in and land on your desk at ATIC?" End of chapter 13. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 14 of The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt. Chapter 14. Digesting the Data. It was soon after we had written a finis to the case of the Scoutmaster that I went into Washington to give another briefing on the latest UFO developments. Several reports had come in during early August that had been read with a good deal of interest in the military and other governmental agencies. By late August 1952, several groups in Washington were following the UFO situation very closely. The sighting that had stirred everyone up came from Haneda Air Force Base, now Tokyo International Airport, in Japan. Since the sighting came from outside the U.S., we couldn't go out and investigate it, but the intelligence officers in the Far East Air Force had done a good job, so we had the complete story of this startling account of an encounter with a UFO. Only a few minor questions had been unanswered, and a quick wire to FEAF brought back these missing data. Normally, it took up to 3 months to get routine questions back and forth, but this time the exchange of wires took only a matter of hours. Several months after the sighting, I talked to one of the FEAF intelligence officers who had investigated it, and in his estimation, it was one of the best to come out of the Far East. The first people to see the UFO were 2 control tower operators who were walking across the ramp at the airbase heading toward the tower to start the midnight shift. They were about a half hour early, so they weren't in any big hurry to get up into the tower, at least not until they saw a large, brilliant light off to the northeast over Tokyo Bay. They stopped to look at the light for a few seconds, thinking that it might be an exceptionally brilliant star. But both men had spent many lonely nights in a control tower when they had nothing to look at except stars, and they had never seen anything this bright before. Besides, the light was moving. The 2 men had lined it up with the corner of a hangar and could see that it was continually moving closer and drifting a little off to the right. In a minute, they had run across the ramp, up the several hundred steps to the tower, and were looking at the light through 7x50 binoculars. Both of the men and the 2 tower operators, whom they were relieving, got a good look at the UFO. The light was circular in shape and had appeared to be the upper portion of a large, round, dark shape which was about 4 times the diameter of the light itself. As they watched, the UFO moved in closer, or at least it appeared to be getting closer, because it became more distinct. When it moved in, the men could see a second and dimmer light on the lower edge of the dark, shadowy portion. In a few minutes, the UFO had moved off to the east, getting dimmer and dimmer as it disappeared. The 4 tower men kept watching the eastern sky, and suddenly the light began to reappear. It stayed in sight a few seconds, was gone again, and then for the 3rd time it came back, heading toward the airbase. This time, one of the tower operators picked up a microphone, called the pilot of a C-54 that was crossing Tokyo Bay, and asked if he could see the light. The pilot didn't see anything unusual. At 11:45 p.m., according to the logbook in the tower, one of the operators called a nearby radar site and asked if they had an unidentified target on their scopes. They did. The FEAF intelligence officers who investigated the sighting made a special effort to try to find out if the radar's unidentified target and the light were the same object. They deduced that they were, since when the tower operators and the radar operators compared notes over the telephone, the light and the radar target were in the same location and were moving in the same direction. For about 5 minutes, the radar tracked the UFO as it cut back and forth across the central part of Tokyo Bay, sometimes traveling so slowly that it almost hovered, and then speeding up to 300 miles an hour. All of this time, the tower operators were watching the light through binoculars. Several times when the UFO approached the radar station, once it came within 10 miles, a radar operator went outside to find out if he could see the light, but no one at the radar site ever saw it. Back at the airbase, the tower operators had called other people and they saw the light. Later on, the tower man said that he had the distinct feeling that the light was highly directional, like a spotlight. Some of the people who were watching thought that the UFO might be a lighted balloon, so, for the sake of comparison, a lighted weather balloon was released. But the light on the balloon was much more yellowish than the UFO, and in a matter of seconds it had traveled far enough away that the light was no longer visible. This gave the observers a chance to compare the size of the balloon and the size of the dark, shadowy part of the UFO. Had the UFO been 10 miles away, it would have been 50 feet in diameter. 3 minutes after midnight, an F-94 scrambled from nearby Johnson Air Force Base came into the area. The ground controller sent the F-94 south of Yokohama, up Tokyo Bay, and brought him in behind the UFO. The second that the ground controller had the F-94 pilot lined up and told him that he was in line for a radar run, the radar operator in the rear seat of the F-94 called out that he had a lock-on. His target was at 6,000 yards, 10 degrees to the right and 10 degrees below the F-94. The lock-on was held for 90 seconds as the ground controller watched both the UFO and the F-94 make a turn and come toward the ground radar.